My name is Martin Madert with the Witness to War Foundation. It's November 2nd, 2019, and we are in Seattle, Washington for the United States Marine Corps Vietnam Tankers Association reunion. So if you could please state your name and spell it.
Spell it?
Yes, sir.
My name is Richard Cecil, and it's Richardcecil.
Terrific. And what years were you in the Marine Corps?
I was in the Marine Corps from 1953 to 1977.
Wow, that's impressive. And what years were you in Vietnam specifically?
I was there 65 and 66.
And what was your rank while in Vietnam?
I was a buck sergeant,
Serving in what unit?
Charlie Company, 3rd Tanks.
So tell me about the... I apologize about that, Richard. I was about to ask if you could tell me the story that you'd like to share today.
Well, I'd like to share a story about an operation that was north of Way. And we had got op orders, and we crossed the Perfume River with an LCU and offloaded and drove into the Kobe Tonton Valley, which is north of Way. It's near what used to be the village of Dono. And our basic mission to start with was to round up the civilians, and they were going to get them out of there. And we roamed around looking for NVA stashes of rice, and we found quite a bit. And also roamed around looking for the NVA or the Viet Cong, and weren't successful at first. And when it got time to leave, we had a lot of problems with stuck tanks, running through abandoned rice paddies, breaking through the crust, and getting. It was a pain, but finally it was a whole company of tanks, and then my section with Lieutenant Kincaid broke off to this little village of Dono, which wasn't there anymore. There's just some ruins, and we set up for the night. Then about 2 a.m., the NVA attacked and basically overran us. They were just everywhere, and I was in the tank by myself, and the crew never showed up because one of them was killed, another was wounded. The other tank that Lieutenant Kincaid was on took a penetration, knocked out the slip ring, so he lost all electrical power. So the tank was just was inoperable. Staff Sergeant Bennett was a tank commander over there, and they took a rocket hit along top of the tank, and it squished his head. He didn't die. He wound up getting a silver plate in his head. I don't know if he's still alive or not. And Kincaid did a good job, but he got a piece of shrapnel in his rear end. So that left me kind of in charge. Well, nobody mounted up my tank, so I had to man the tank by myself. So that's what I did. One of the side issues of that was kind of interesting. Earlier we had 2 Flynns in the Marine Corps. We had a Marvin C. Flynn and a J.J. Flynn. Well, Marvin C. said, "Will you please haul my Willie Peter bag," which is a waterproof clothing bag. And so my gypsy rack was full, so I lashed it to the back of the tank and never thought about it. Well, the next day we got to looking, and I took a rocket hit. It hit the Willie Peter bag and hit the tank, penetrated the tank to a point, but singed the paint inside, but never penetrated. And the reason it didn't was because of that Willie Peter bag out there. Had that not been there, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today, because it would have penetrated the tank. And at that level where it was at, there's about, 6 or 7 ready rounds in a ready rack, and they would have sympathetically detonated. So that Willie Peter bag was a blessing. So anyway, we rounded up all this stuff, put it in a new Willie Peter bag, and gave it to him, and he opened it up, and he really got excited about that. And anyway, all his stuff was wrecked except a Marine Corps check. And it didn't have a hole in it. It was just spotless. It was really quite a deal. Eventually, the next night, we spent another night there, and we were attacked again, but it was pretty minor. It was just leftover remnants of the previous unit, I think. And then we pulled back to where the 155 howitzers were located at, which, by the way, I used my radios to call in a strike where I thought the NVA would be leaving. Anywho, we pulled back there and started to repair some damage and so forth. And I got to cleaning my 90mm gun. I couldn't get a bore brush through it. It would not fit. So I got to looking. Well, I took a rocket had hit the tube and creased the underneath and bubbled the inside. And I was shooting it like that. I never noticed any difference, but it had to be registered in some real wild chamber pressures. So anywho, they got a contact team out of Japan and came down and removed the gun tube. Gun tube came out rather rapidly because it was a quick kind of deal, and they took it out, and sun was going down. They were going to leave. They didn't want to spend the night out there with us at all. They were going to leave, and I says, like hell you're leaving. You're not going to leave me with no gun in this thing. Just sitting there, you know, impotent. So anyway, they stayed and they put a gun tube in, and that all came out all right, and that was pretty interesting, putting the gun tube out there. And then we did general mechanic work. We welded up some holes in the tank and fixed the fenders and replaced the Xeon searchlight that was shot out. And the grunts formed a perimeter around us, so we didn't have any real problems with that. So when finally it came time to leave the valley, well, we'd been out there 30 days. So when the tank were repaired, we started going back out in the valley, destroying hooches, killing the water buffalo, and rounding up the people. And eventually we got all the civilians that were living there out, and they came out. And while we were roaming around, we had 2 Joneses that I knew of in Tank Battalion. This was, don't want to call him Crazy Jones, but he was a little off center. He hit a landmine down on the road, so we put a perimeter out to protect his tank while they got it repaired, and we got it in, and that was kind of humorous. I don't think you find that humorous, but we did, you know, because Jones was quite a character. But and then in that same operation, we're roaming around out there just with a tank out in the boondocks there. And anyway, we were killing all the water buffalo because they would take the water buffalo and they'd run it into our lines at night, setting off trip flares and so forth. And then I had shot this water buffalo, was still crawling, so I told the driver, just run over it. But it went out over the radios. I said, what they thought I'd done, had wounded a VC, and I was fixing to go run over him, and that wasn't the case at all. It was a water buffalo we were dealing with. So that's always been kind of a humorous thing for me when I think back on it. And that same operation.
You tried to pay
Pardon?
the Vietnamese money for those water buffalo too.
Yeah, they were valuable. They were valuable. The Vietnamese counted that as wealth, though it was something that we did. I didn't necessarily agree with it. It was just what we did. This is the way it worked at the time. And then come back in one night, and I pulled into position. I had diarrhea really bad. So I got, tank goes into position. I jump on the tank, run out in front of the tank, squat down, and I hit a trip flare, and it goes up. I said, don't shoot, suckers, it's me, you know. They didn't shoot, and it came out all right. And then my replacement crew got out there. It was a communicator and a corpsman, and that was kind of interesting. They had no tank experience, and it filled out the crew, and so everything was, we wrapped that whole operation up. We were headed back to Phu, and the Buddhists had set up shrines all along the road, probably a shrine every 100, 200 yards. And every time we got to a shrine, we had to negotiate. And then they'd remove the shrine, and we'd go to the next shrine. This took, half and 3/4 of a day. And it was really time consuming and not a good program. So about that time, they brought a bunch of Vietnamese Marines out there. And they just knocked over the shrines, and that was the end of that. We didn't get stopped anymore, so we pulled back into Phu, and that completed the operation. It was supposed to last, I think, 4 or 5 days. It lasted about 28 days or something, and some of the tanks were so badly stuck, they sent out railroad ties and 100-foot cables, and just really, but they got them all together. And the other thing that occurred, I almost missed this, it's one of my very favorite stories that happened. We lagered the tanks in the same operation. I know I'm a little disjointed here, okay? We lagered the tanks, which means you put them in a circle with all the guns facing outboard for the evening. And we'd been on sea rations for quite a while. And so they flew out an old 34 helicopter, and they brought out chicken, fried chicken. I don't know where it came from. It wasn't Kentucky Fried, but they brought out fried chicken and Heineken's beer. Well, the Heineken's beer is in glass bottles. So the gooks started throwing mortars at us, and they were just intermittent. They weren't really, I don't think they were too serious about it, but everybody's running to the tanks. Well, about that time, somebody said, save the beer. So all these guys went out and they saved the beer. They told the beer, and then I looked through my vision blocks, and here's that chicken sitting out there all by itself. So we finally got back to our base camp, and that's the end of that story.
What was the relationship like with the Vietnamese? Did you interact with them at all?
Not at all, no. Where we were at, and my whole tour of duty over there, we interacted with the kids a lot of times. The minute you sat a tank in and you were in there any length of time, a bunch of Vietnamese kids would show up. And for the most part, I'm sure some of them weren't too squared away, but we would give them sea rations and candy and so forth. Just what we did. As far as the adults go, a lot of times they just stare at you. And we didn't have any real relationship there. A lot of people did, and the corpsmen did great jobs going over there. They improved the breed of chickens, they helped with the hogs, they set plants, and they had what they called a county fair sometimes where they would set up tents. And one sure way to get little kids out for inoculation and stuff was show Walt Disney cartoons, is what they did. It worked well. And then, of course, a little bit of good information on what the NVA were doing and stuff. But the NVA so much terrorized, and the Viet Cong terrorized the Vietnamese people. They were between the rock and the hard place.
So tell me about bringing in replacements to a tanker.
Pardon?
What's it like bringing in someone new to a established tanker group?
Well, gosh, that's a good. Well, I'll just the dock and the corpsman that came out you give them a good crash course on what a loader. All he's really got. A loader is all he got to do is know the commands, load the 90, which was not complicated, and keep the 30 caliber machine gun running, which is a little complicated. But once you got them squared away on that, no problem. It's tough to train a driver in that set of circumstances, and it's tough to train a gunner. You just if that's what you got, that's what you do, and just. Sit him down in the driver's compartment, you give him a crash course of how it works. Where tanks have automatic transmissions, so it's not a hard thing. They don't have the gears to shift, but you got to know where to take them.
And so tell me more about your crew. You mentioned Kincaid and Bennett and the two Flynns. Was there anybody else?
No, the two Flynns weren't there. Just that one Flynn.
Okay.
And he was acting as I don't know what he was doing. He was on the ground though. He wasn't in a tank, although he was a tanker. And but he was on the ground. Lieutenant Kincaid, he ultimately, I served with him again on Okinawa, and he attained the rank of major and retired. Good guy. We had a young Marine. He was a black Marine, a good guy. We call him Little John. I don't even know his real name. But when the lieutenant got hit, he shoved him off to one side and took charge of that tank and made it happen. And so that was pretty impressive. So that's one thing you'll find most Marines will do, and get the job done. And sometimes if somebody can't do it or won't do it, you just get them out of the way and get somebody else to do it, or you do it.
Sounds like he was a really effective leader out there.
Pardon?
Sounds like he was a very effective leader.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I was, maybe I'm not. I have no idea.
And how about Bennett?
Staff Sergeant Bennett, yeah, he was a good guy. He really was, and he was our platoon sergeant, and we would get down and work with us and help to get the job done. I remember him as just the guy that wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. And one time we had a tank in a ditch in the same operation at a throwed track, and it was in about 2 or 3 feet of water, and we're all out there working on it, and we're just happy as clams because the water's cool and it's hot, and I've noticed that day that we went through a 5-gallon can of water just drinking it. That's how the hot heat and humidity got to you. But it wasn't such a fun time after all, because when we come out of that water we had lots of leeches, so it's just, we learned to blouse your trousers when you get in that kind of stuff. But no, he was a good man, and I'm not sure he's still alive now, but he's a good man.
Tell me about your homecoming. What was it like coming home from Vietnam?
Pardon?
What was your homecoming from Vietnam like?
Well, it just, my homecoming, I landed at Travis Air Force Base. No, excuse me, El Toro. We landed at El Toro, took buses to San Diego, and was greeted in San Diego by my grandmother. And I think for professional Marines, which I was, I've been in the Corps 10 years when all this was going on. For a professional, all the protests and stuff, you just didn't pay any attention to it. I mean, it didn't emotionally affect me. Now, I can see where it would young guys and draftees, but if Dan was talking there, I think he'd agree with me, because it's just the way it was.
And you stayed in the Corps for a little while. Anything in your career stand out to you? Any memorable assignments? You already told me you went to Okinawa once.
Well, I went to Okinawa about 3 or 4 times, or at least 3 times. And the Okinawa was not bad duty. It was pretty good duty.
Dealing with a lot of guys in and out of Vietnam.
Pardon?
Dealing with a lot of guys in and out of Vietnam while you're in Okinawa.
Well, yeah, that you had constant. That was one of the things they did during the war that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Was the individual replacement. They should have used just replace units with units, and you don't lose the integrity.
They changed that, in Vietnam, but you joined in '53. So in Korea, they still had what's a cohort system? Is that what they called it?
Pardon?
What did they call it back then? It was the cohort system or
I don't know.
something. Yeah, that is a better way to go about sending people into combat, isn't it?
Well, what I've been referenced to, you send units.
Yeah.
Then you have unit cohesiveness, whereas you send individuals. I can't tell you what they used to call new guys when they got over there, but nobody trusted.
FNGs.
Huh?
FNGs.
Yeah, FNGs. You got it. And they didn't trust them, and until they proved that they were up to the task.
And that's assuming they didn't get shot in the first couple
Yeah,
of weeks.
well, the lieutenants had a high. One of the things about it, though, that with lieutenants, and I had some good ones, is the ones that weren't good didn't last. They either were killed or they pulled them off. They pulled them out and sent them someplace else.
You don't have to be specific with the name, but was there any bad lieutenant that stands on your mind? What were they like?
I would not bring that up.
Sure. Well, lastly, any other stories about Vietnam? Anything else you'd like to talk about?
Oh, let me think. Well, the last we pulled in a position down by the Chulai area, and because beer was hard to come by, people used to make Jackin in 5-gallon water cans. This particular time, we moved into this area, and this friend of mine, he decided he was roaming around the bushes, setting the tank in, and found a can of Jack. And he don't know who made it, or what was in it, or how long it had even been there, and he drank it. Not the whole can at once, but I mean, he partook. And he probably knows who I'm talking about, but it's just, we laughed about that. He didn't get sick, so it came out all right, So it was funny when we thought about it.
Yeah, I imagine drinking's extremely important out there if you're going to be out in the field for weeks at a time.
Well, it is and it isn't. It's, if they don't abuse it, it's okay.
So what do you want people to remember about Vietnam based on...
Pardon?
What do you want people to remember about Vietnam based on all your experiences there?
That our guys went over and did a good job, and we were sent. We did the best we could. We tried to win it. We never lost a battle. I'm not talking about me personally, but during the whole Vietnam War, they didn't lose a battle, including Tet. And so the politicians lost it. I don't know. Maybe we should have never been there to start with. I don't know, but it's still, when you take the servicemen, the 58,000 that died, all of them worked for the betterment of the Vietnamese people, keep them free and keep them fed and so forth. And it just, I honor them.
Is there any song that if you heard today would take you back to Vietnam?
I'm leaving on a jet plane, okay?
That's a good one. And lastly, any final thoughts, words of advice for anybody watching this in the future?
Support the troops. It's the politicians that send them to war. Support the troops.
Richard, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come by and share your stories with me tonight. It's an honor and a pleasure, but more importantly, thank you so much for your service, sir.
Oh, you got it.